You're listening to the Road to Wisdom podcast, weaving stories told by wonderful minds about all things motherhood, health, intimacy, politics, nature, and everything in between.
Join us on an adventure discovering unique experiences that we can learn from to enhance the ways in which we live.
We are your hosts, Chloe
and Keshia. We would really appreciate it if everyone could review and rate us on Spotify and iTunes. It helps us to build our community, and we know that we're getting so many listens, but what helps us even more is if you can give us those ratings and reviews. So please
5 stars only though. I don't want your 1-star rating.
If you're enjoying the content, that would be
We don't
great.
want to hear from you if you don't like us, basically.
But it helps us to secure awesome people like Jinti, who we have in the studio today. So welcome, Jinti. This definitely isn't just a friendship chat because we haven't seen each other for so long. We have no idea who Jinti is, but luckily we were able to secure her because of everyone's
those reviews.
All the reviews. She actually, I just dropped a DM into her. I was like, "Hey, babe, do you want to chat with us?" And she went straight to our reviews and seen how many 5 stars we had, and that was.
You got me.
That's how we got her. So let's keep that going.
Come on, guys, help us out.
Anyway.
Well, thank you, Jinti, for coming in today. We are doing a little series on unassisted pregnancies and free births because there is a real hole in the information out in the Ethernet. It does seem to get a little bit of censorship, and I think it's a really important thing if pregnant women or women who are looking to conceive and have babies, I mean, we're all told be prepared for a potential C-section. Like that could always be a possibility and you should be prepared for that just in case. But then we censor all the information about free birth, which is also a potential that we should all be prepared for, even if that is not our plan, even if that's, definitely not the way we want to go.
You could give birth in your car, people.
Yeah, some babies just aren't going to get to the hospital. So it's still, whether this is your jam or not, it's still something that it's good to hear stories of babies that come out without all the bells and whistles of the medical system, because it happens, whether you're prepared for it or not at times. And I think it's nice to know or to hear the beautiful stories of where it happens, planned or unplanned, and it's okay. And everyone survives. The carpet sometimes doesn't, but everyone else survives. So we have Jinti in to talk with us about that and her experiences. And yeah, hi Jinti.
Hello. I'm excited to chat all things birth. It's funny, when I'm not pregnant or actively about to give birth, it's almost something I hardly think about. So it's nice and fun to chat about it because it's such a fun topic, really.
Oh, it's the best. We'll just remind you, and once you're reminded about it, we'll just plant that little spirit baby.
Oh my God.
We were talking about 3 to 4 and how it's so much easier. So we're trying to get Jinti on the 4 baby bed again.
I haven't bought it yet. You have not convinced me that it's easier.
Oh, but what we'd love to hear, if you could give us a really brief rundown of your birth with Aya, and then subsequent births and how and why you chose that method of pregnancy and birth.
Okay. So with my first Ayana,
Apologies, Ayana.
No, I think Aya, you know. So I'll sort of set the scene with that. We were at uni, my partner and I, and we both had a year left of our studies to go. We hated it. We just thought, we were very much in this mindset of this is how the trajectory of life goes, where, we traveled, we needed to get our degrees, we needed to get these careers going and all of these things, but both of us were pretty miserable studying at uni, and we decided to take a year off and do this like last big trip before we thought like we'll get serious adult jobs and things like that. So we went backpacking with the intention of traveling for a year. We had just like, a backpack each. We were in Indonesia, and 2 weeks into that trip is when I conceived, 2 weeks into our year-long trip. And it was a massive shock. Like, I was rattled by this. I found out when we were in America, actually, and I took a pregnancy test in Lake Powell, like a public toilet, and I took a second one in a subway.
Just to make sure.
Just to make sure. And I found out I was pregnant. It was like the day after my 25th birthday. And so I ended up traveling until I was like 32 weeks pregnant. So we were full on backpacking. I was sleeping in a hiking tent. We traveled like North America into Canada. Then we were in South America for a few months. And so I was relatively outside of the system. Most of my pregnancy was outside of the normal system. I did see a doctor in America when I was freaking out about being pregnant, because I just was like, what do I even do? None of my sisters or friends had kids yet, and it was very much like, what the heck do I do? Anyway, we traveled. I came back to Australia when I was 32 weeks, and I went and found a private midwife. I wanted to have a home birth, but I couldn't afford it at the time, and I had never heard of free birth or unassisted birth. And so we just sort of did the best that we could. I knew I definitely would want a water birth, and I was so committed to being a good girl though, and people pleasing and doing all of the things. I was so scared about coming home to Australia and a midwife or the doctors or whatever thinking that I was like irresponsible for traveling in pregnancy, because the one doctor I saw in the States, she was like, yep, you're going to have to change your plans. You're going to have to go home now. And I was like, literally crying in my car. So we were sort of told, okay, that's it, go back to Australia. And it was just a really stressful time. It took me a long time to accept that I was pregnant. And actually we were in Peru and we were hiking, and I remember feeling her moving for the first time and being just so mind blown that there was this little human growing inside of me, and I could feel her, and it just made it so much more real. But like I said, I was very much that experience, my first birth, it sort of was this initiation into obviously motherhood, but almost womanhood for me, where I went from this maiden who was really committed to just pleasing and doing all of the things. So anyway, I went into this birth not feeling like I didn't have it within me, like I needed other people to tell me what to do and things like that, and just not feeling super confident. But I knew that I definitely want to give birth in water. And anyway,
Can I pause you there for a second, Jinti? Because that's a really, I think, common occurrence. And I wonder, like, how is it that we as women grow up and we get to, or like as girls, we grow up, we get to a childbearing age, we fall pregnant, and I was trying to fall pregnant, so I didn't have like that to overcome as well that you both had. Like it wasn't a surprise. We were actively trying for months. But then as soon as I was pregnant, I'm like, I don't know what to do. I need help. I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, how is it that we're all
so dissociated from our
like
childbearing?
How do we raise our women, our girls, so that when they fall pregnant, there's like that deep knowing, which we all have, but for some reason push it aside that first time to like be like, my body knows what it's like. Yeah. My body like knows what it's doing. We know.
I think it's just like the entire system that we have experienced. Like it's very normalized to be a part of the medical system, and it does create separation between our inner knowing, our bodies, and we're outsourcing our power to someone else to tell us what's going on inside ourselves. But I really do think that is shifting the more we just question things and share our birthing stories and podcasts like these. So I went into that birth. I saw a midwife a couple of times. I got a private midwife because I just needed to know who was going to show up at the birth. I didn't want some random person being like, what's up? So I had a 15-hour labour at home, and it was like the best experience of my life. It was just my partner Chris and I, 15 hours, and it sounds so cliche, but it just changed us entirely. And then I did not want to leave the home to give birth. It was just us there the entire time. And there was just this part of me that knew when to told Chris, text a midwife now to come over. And she arrived. She lived down the road from us. And she arrived and she was like, wow, if you're going to give birth at the hospital, we need to leave right now. And I still look back at that moment and be like, oh, I wish I was like, let's just stay. We're not going anywhere.
Just a little bit longer.
But the car ride was just really terrible experience. I think, Chloe, you spoke about the car ride to
Did you go to
Gold Coast Hospital or the birthing centre?
So far.
Yeah, it was. I remember the sun was just coming up and like every little bump in the road. Oh. So I gave birth to my daughter 20 minutes after we arrived, and we left 2 hours later. We were not there for very long, and like I said, the whole experience was. I still look back at it as the best experience of my life. I got into the birthing pool. I started feeling pushy when we arrived. I thought I needed to do a poop. I was like, oh, that's a baby. Got into the birth pool as it was filling. The midwives, I didn't even know where they were at, and my mum had come with us. So it was Chris, my mum and I, and we were just in our own little world. Chris and I still, I just remember him having his arms around me in the birth pool, and just I was unaware of anything else. And I started feeling her crowning. And I remember saying to Chris, like, can you see her hair? And the midwife, well, actually, this is one of the midwives I'd never met or seen. I had no idea she was even in the room. She said, darling, you're going to have to do a hell of a lot more to get that baby out. And I remember thinking,
no.
Yes. I was not offended at the time. I was just like,
Okay.
Literally, if that is not my baby, what on earth is that? Like, I've been in labour for 15 hours. What is that? And then the next surge that I had, she was born. They ran over just like so shocked. And yeah, we just wanted to be gone from the hospital. So we sort of signed some paperwork and left. About 2 hours after I gave birth, I gave birth to the placenta maybe half an hour afterwards. And that's actually when our whole knowing with free birth or unassisted birth, which I didn't know what those terms were at the time, but I remember we got home and Chris, we were so high. We were on the craziest high. And Chris said, he's like, imagine if you just didn't leave, like if we just did it, you just did it yourself. And I was like, yeah, that's definitely what I'll do in the future. I just knew. It's like I felt my power for the first time. I just realized how strong I was and that I could trust my intuition, and that actually having people come into the space really messed up the flow of me giving birth, and it hindered the experience. And yeah, so it was after that we just both knew that we would, I suppose, free birth or have unassisted birth in the future. And that's what happened, when I fell pregnant the next time.
Oh, that's amazing. Because I, in my own experiences, my first was in hospital with a private obstetrician. So definitely a different experience. But afterwards, I was like, what hindered my birthing process was definitely the lights. It was the lights in the hospital. Like there were too many people in there. I didn't like anyone touching me, and the lights were like killing the flow of my labor. And I mean, the whole time, because I actually have a fear of hospitals. Like it's not even just I don't like them. Like I actually have an icky gritty fear of them. And I remember like that whole pregnancy, I'm like, oh, wouldn't it be great if I just jumped in the bath and the baby came out? Like, or wouldn't it be great? And I joked with my obstetrician about it too. And he's like, look, it could happen. Like he was really relaxed as well, which I was very fortunate to have. But I remember then we did a hypnobirthing course the second time round, and I was like, if we just accidentally stayed home for too long, like we didn't have the language for unassisted or free birth, like none of that was in our realm, and I didn't know anyone who would ever want to have a baby without anyone there. But I had heard stories of babies coming out in cars and babies just like coming out in fields and all of this stuff. I'm like, imagine if we just stayed home. Like what's like,
this is lovely.
Yeah. So yeah, it's funny that, and it would have been similar timing, hey? Like, because our first were about
3 months
apart.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then how old?
My son is 4.5.
Okay. All right. So yeah, Humphrey's a little bit closer to Willow. Yeah. So when we did have Humphrey, it was at home and I was on the toilet thinking I need to do a poo and, and no, it's a baby. But
I do think it's interesting, just quickly, that the more we talk about unassisted birth, it really is starting to have such a similar, like a reoccurrence in pattern of women saying that as soon as someone enters the room, as soon as there's something, a force or an energy that enters the space, or they leave their space, or they leave where they feel safe, that's when stuff starts to go the other way, or it starts to slow down, or it doesn't progress, or something like happens, or they need to kind of retreat and come back into that space or turn off the lights or whatever it is. But I'm really observing that this is such a reoccurring thing, that when women aren't left the freaking hell alone, that's when stuff starts happening. So yeah.
Yeah, completely. I think Ina May Gaskin says, the energy like of love making is the energy of like giving birth, and that if you couldn't, make love in that space or that room, like it's going to be hard to give birth there. And I really resonate with that.
Yeah, oh God, I can't remember who said it, but it really stuck with me. And it's like, if you couldn't push your shit out in front of all those people, you're not.
Comedic side of what Jinti just said. You can't take a shit in front of that nurse. I'm sorry.
You're not going to be able to push a baby out.
The intimate energy of lovemaking, and you're like, if you can't do a shit.
But seriously, and like,
it's true though. I'm sorry, but in that moment, I don't
here's
think you
the thing.
there's not much you couldn't do.
Chances are you are going to shit yourself. So if you're trying to hold that in while a baby's trying to come out, it's going to make things really difficult and probably create a whole bunch of complications for you.
True.
So, we all laugh about poo, but
They're very mature.
it's so mature. But it's like, yeah, again, things that you don't want people around for. Pooping, lovemaking. Like if you can't get to orgasm in front of a room of people in masks and
but
Your
lights.
gynecologist.
Sorry, but Jinti said say her mum was there. So
Yeah.
would you do that in front of your mum?
Hi, Mum.
She'll probably listen as
Okay,
well.
we're getting so silly now.
So yes,
sorry, Jinti.
second. Let's stop this. Let's get to second pregnancy and birth.
What would you like to know?
Well, so I mean, I guess your first pregnancy was just like incidentally, you didn't have monitoring purely
Yes.
because you guys were on a traveling mission, which, I mean, did anything come up during that where you're like, oh, maybe we do need to check on something or...
Yeah. I look back, it was such a blessing because I feel like if I was in Australia and had just gone into that experience, which was a surprise experience, I don't know if I would have had the strength to sort of forge my own path and do how I would have wanted to do it. So now I look back thinking, wow, I'm so grateful that we were traveling and I didn't have to there were decisions to make, but we ultimately decided we were going to carry on with the trip. I did get I got 2 scans. So I mentioned that we'd been hiking, like we went on a 5-day hike when I think it was 18 weeks. And afterwards, I remember thinking, I think I just want to get a scan. It was after I'd felt her moving and I just thought, okay, this is what we do. And maybe to be responsible, we should do something, you know. So we actually got a scan and it was really short. We'd gone, I think we were in like Cusco or something, and we didn't speak a lot of Spanish. So that alone was just an adventure to get it done. But something came up on the scan where there was like a blood clot or something. And he was like, oh, this isn't meant to be here. It's like a language barrier. But he was just like, you need to really rest and chill out. But he recommended getting a scan later on. So when we were in like Colombia, I got a second scan and it was at sort of like a really Western sort of medical center, and I really didn't like that experience at all. So the only times that I did sort of seek care were the only times that I was very anxious and stressed out in that pregnancy, which I found really interesting. So yeah, I'd had those scans and wait a sec, where am I going with this?
No, well, yeah, just like how incidentally in that first pregnancy you didn't have much monitoring.
Yes. And so then it was very much a conscious decision going into my next pregnancy. I suppose having had that first experience, knowing I could trust myself, feeling a lot more confident, also meeting a lot of mothers. I wasn't friends with other mums before having my first, and then just opening up my world to so many different stories and understanding that there were so many ways that we could go about our pregnancies, our births. And it wasn't so much a decision where I was like, I am going to free birth. It was just this unfolding of each day, each month of pregnancy. I was just listening to what I needed, what I felt called to doing, the prenatal care that felt right to me. But I very much knew that I would be birthing at home. There was no way I was going anywhere. Of course, like I don't live my life fearing for the worst. You know, I'm planning for the best outcomes, knowing that we can trust ourselves with whatever comes up. And so that was how I sort of viewed the birth and that pregnancy. And I definitely feel like for me, pregnancy is a marker of health in a way. And so I just felt, you know, I'm just going to do what I always do. You know, health and wellness is a huge priority of mine. So just do all of the things that I knew that made me feel really good. And of course, a lot came up through that pregnancy, and nothing to do with my ability to birth. It was more to do with dealing with what would people think about my decision? What if something happened and it's all my fault? What would I do? You know, there was a lot of fears about, am I being irresponsible? What's the best thing for my children and stuff like that. So it was just constantly like facing different fears and understanding that, you know, it was more important for me to do what I knew was right as opposed to avoiding making anyone else uncomfortable with my choices.
I feel like a really great counter question that I would always ask myself when a fear would come up would be, okay, if I had chosen the path of the medical system and that thing happened, would I feel better about that? Like I could put that blame on the medical system, or would I still feel responsible? And it was always, I would still feel responsible.
Yes.
That was still 100% my responsibility, doesn't matter where I am. So that was always like a good indication of like, yeah, I'm on the right.
Yeah, I did the same thing as well, because it's to give life, you have to face death. They're not separate. And obviously, like even saying that word, it's heavy, but like when we're talking about birth and when we're going and, you know, creating life, it's not separate in any way. So I feel like actually a lot of my fears that were coming up and facing, like they were fears of death and just like this avoidance of just like the unknown. And I think that my birth, my second with my son, was actually such a huge lesson in just being with discomfort and allowing fear to be there, but it knowing, you know, it wasn't about life and death as much as it was just about like uncomfortable things that I needed to process and see and explore in myself, I suppose. But ultimately for me, my free birth with him and just having a pregnancy outside the system, having the birth that I knew from around when I conceived exactly how my son needed to be born. I haven't had that in all of my experiences, but I was like, it's like this, it has to be like this. And it really taught me the concept of, you know, radical responsibility in life, and that it's like beyond placing blame, like whose fault if something happens. Like it's so beyond that. And it's like, yeah, so I think, you know, all of my children have had like big lessons in each pregnancy and birth. But I think, yeah, with my son in that first experience, it was all about just taking complete responsibility in my life and in all areas. Yeah. And also that was sort of like the death of that person that was so committed to people pleasing and stepping into a more empowered place with like the decisions I made. Because also at the time we did YouTube when I was going through this whole pregnancy, we documented our lives. And so there was sort of like this added thing there was a lot of opinions coming in, and there was, you know, even within family and stuff, like everyone's got an opinion about how you give birth. And
I only had to navigate that with family and friends, whereas I can only imagine the step up it is to have to navigate that with the entire online world.
How did you shut that out though? Because I feel like, you know, you got to the end and you ended up having the birth that you wanted to have, and you had that vision, and it stood strong. But you know, like millions of people have watched your YouTube, and you know, if you ever read the comments, I'm sure people's opinions, they can get kind of sticky in your brain and your thoughts. And so were you okay to just push it down, or were you like, oh, I really have to like this is kind of imprinting in me?
I was very careful with what I did share, and I didn't overshare much. I just was like, okay, this is what I'm comfortable with. But I did keep sort of some spaciousness around what I was doing and stuff like that. And then once he was here and I'd given birth, I knew that I'd done what I needed to do. So people's comments didn't land.
Yeah.
And I always also think that it's the people closest to us that have the most impact anyway. So, you know, I'd been sharing online for a few years by that stage. I sort of had, you know, people are always going to have an opinion, and I was, you know, I'm sort of navigating that, but I suppose it's always the people closest that have the most impact anyway. So that was probably more interesting to navigate for me. Yeah.
So then when it came to Tashi's pregnancy and birth, how did you switch things up when it came to, I guess, what you shared, what you told other people the plan was? And
I suppose with each child I've become progressively more confident, and also more, not outspoken, that's probably not the right word, but I just understand the importance of sharing our stories, because other women's stories are what helped me so much in my birth prep. I'm not someone that I will have to go and do all the research and all of this. I just want to hear other women's stories. That's what gives me confidence. And but Tashi's birth, that was another different time in my life. That was my orgasmic birth gone rogue. That didn't really happen. I was like, this is it, my third child. Like orgasmic birth. Like I want to have like a pleasurable birth experience.
Just really quickly, were you listening to Emily Saldea's stuff and Yolanda and, oh God, there was another one.
Yeah, is this when you did Yolanda's
I did.
work?
So I did a mentorship with Yolanda and Emily, but that was just after I gave birth to my son, before I gave birth to Tashi, for a year. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
But actually what set me off on this orgasmic birth journey was I did a Kim and Ami course, a well-fucked woman.
Oh my gosh, we want to talk to her too. And we're
Yolanda, Kim, come on.
powerhouses.
Yeah. So I took one of her courses and it was just a really interesting time in my life, just exploring my own like sexuality and intimacy with my partner and just all of these things. And I really thought I'm just going to have like this blissful birth, and then like, life didn't really happen like that. Like it was an amazing birth. It was so chill. Did you want me to like go through?
Please.
So the pregnancy or?
Let's go pregnancy.
Okay.
Conscious conception.
Sort of. So like I said, I'd taken that Kim and Ami course and my son had stopped breastfeeding. I knew I wanted to have a third child. Like I felt my daughter, like my third child's presence, like from giving birth to my son, I had my next daughter's name. The day after like I'd given birth, I was like, Chris, this is her name. Like she's here, she's ready. And he was like, oh my gosh, like we
Like,
just
chill out.
had a baby. So what happened was, my son finished breastfeeding. I thought, we weren't traveling. We'd come back to Australia and I was thinking, let's have a baby. And then it just sort of didn't happen for a few months. And then life got rocky. So I did not expect to just get emotional.
Oh, it's okay, honey.
Let it out.
Let it out, yeah. Or we can skip, whatever you're comfortable with.
1 second, I'll just take a breath. So like before I came, I was like, I'm going to cry. I always cry.
Okay. These are contagious tears. So
Oh, God.
Okay. So, I was a little, actually at the time when I was trying to conceive, I was very much sort of using a phone app and tracking my cycle. And I actually think that was really not great for me. That actually disconnected me from just listening to the cycles of my own body. And I don't think I was accurately sort of tracking. And it was only when I completely let go of all of that and had sort of surrendered pregnancy, just whatever, I found out that my dad was really unwell. And he was like a very important and like person in my life and in my kid's life. And so we sort of went down this like a few months of just caring for him and saying goodbye to him. And when he passed away, I actually was like, I'm not having any more kids. Like they'll never meet him. This is just not the right time. And so I fully let go of having another child. And it was crazy because the last time I ever bled was like the day of his funeral. And then I found out like a bit over a month later that I was actually pregnant. And it was, so I'd sort of gone into this thinking, I'm going to have the most amazing birth, a pregnancy, just like this blissful time. I'm going to have like my orgasmic birth. And I was like, it wasn't like that. So I feel like I was deep in grief my whole pregnancy and like parenting 2 kids, and just like sort of dealing with that and that. Sorry.
No. You guys need a minute. Okay. Oh my gosh.
It's taken a turn.
He's just like, this is a really fucked up situation right now.
No, I'm just like, hold the space, hold the space. Don't give it any attention. We've got the space, woman. All right, let's go. Okay.
Okay, that helped a lot. I feel.
Okay, good.
Oh,
okay.
So, yeah, I went through that pregnancy. It sort of threw me. I just had this vision of how it was going to be, and, you know, that's how life happens there, I suppose. And it was just, there was so many synchronicities though that, you know, even when I sort of just estimated around the month that she would be due or whatever, and her due date was my dad's birthday. So there was like lots of little things along the way that I felt like I really lent into. And so, yeah, I didn't really even prepare for her birth. I was just knew, we'll be right, like just have a baby at home. It was very low key, not a lot of prep, I suppose, around it. I did have an amazing birth. It was so cruisy. It was just Chris and I, which is how I'd always wanted to give birth from that very first experience that I'd had. So with my son, my first daughter, Ayana, was there at the birth with my sister. And I had always had this dream of just like, imagine if it was just Chris and I giving birth, how special that would be. And so it sort of did go like that. It was just us. My sister had the other 2 kids. And I actually I laboured a lot by myself. I realised when Chris was around me that I wanted him to sort of save me from something or make it better. And I noticed it intensified the sensations that I was experiencing, because I was sort of like, I needed saving, or like someone make this, fix it, or take away the pain. And then when I was alone labouring, there was none of that going on. I was just like, this is just it. There's no one here to save me. Like, I just have to go through this. And it helped a lot just being alone. It wasn't a super long labour. It was a few hours. We had a birth pool, and it was actually, I forgot this till just now, I couldn't make a sound. I was completely silent the entire birth, like not even a peep. Whereas with my other 2, I wasn't, roaring them out at all. It was I'm not like a loud birther, but there was a lot of like, and stuff. This was just complete silence. And I had a moment, which now I look back as like transition, where I decided I'm absolutely done. I actually had this little video that Chris took of me. It is so tragic. I'm like, I have this like wet cloth on my head on the side of the pool, and I'm over it. I'm just sitting there like, nah. I'm like, I am done. I know.
Baby staying in forever.
We're done. And I remember Chris said to me, he's like, babe, you've got this. Like, by the time it's like the sun's setting, like tonight you're going to get into bed with your baby. And I just looked at him, because it was maybe midday. And I remember thinking, what the heck are you talking about? I am not going to be in labour like until tonight. Like, absolutely not. Like, we're getting this done. And he didn't realise, he couldn't tell where I was at. Like other births, he can sort of tell where I'm at, but because I was completely silent, he's just thinking like, oh, we're just getting started. Like, we are in here. I remember I started pushing her head out. I said to him, I was like, do you sense the shift? And he said to me, yeah. And later on, he's like, no, I was just like saying yes. And that's
to keep you happy, babe.
actually. And that's when I was fully giving birth to her. And I was like, if you're going to film it, can you get my phone? And he's like, what? And like grabbed the phone, and like her head was basically out by that stage. And then, yeah, that was it. Like she was out, her head was out for a little bit, like actually a few minutes probably. And then we birthed her into the water, and maybe a minute after she was born, like my other two kids came in with my sister, and yeah, that was just it. It was it was very straightforward, and carried on with life. We ate some burgers, and that was it.
Oh my goodness. So it wasn't, it just sounds like your stock standard, normal, physiological, beautiful birth, but it just wasn't obviously quite what you had in mind. Do you feel like you still are wishing or hoping for that type of birth, or are you completely just like
just plant that seed?
do you want that fourth baby? You could have that orgasmic birth again. No, I mean, like, have you accepted and kind of surrendered to, like, or even to surrendering to what that lesson was there for you? Because like when you go into something, and I know from experience, I've gone into birth, I'm like, this is what's going to be. This is what it is. This is what I'm doing. And twice it's just been like, no, it ain't.
Yeah.
And you kind of like, why? Like what was there for me, or what should, or was it just that I just did something silly and I shouldn't have done that? Or, yeah, like, have you accepted?
Yeah,
that?
I fully accepted that during the experience. Even it wasn't like, it wasn't meant to be like this. Where's my orgasm? Like,
Where's my orgasm?
no, it was just like you said. I do feel, for me, there's always just a really big lesson, and it's exactly sort of how it needs to be. And I'm saying that though, as someone who's birthing, outside of the system, I think there's a whole nother layer if it goes differently than you planned, and there was a lot of intervention and it became outside of your control and like, quite traumatic or anything like that. I feel like, okay, there's going to be a lot of unpacking there, and it's quite a different experience than being like, oh, these were all my choices. I was very in my power, and it just unfolded like this. So it's very, for me, very easy to accept as, oh, no, this is just how I needed to be. And yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel like, oh my God, I just lost my complete train of thought then.
Hey, I had no idea about your dad. Because like, what the fuck, one? Because I don't know. Like, I don't know. You probably don't know about my dad, which is why I came to fucking tears just then. Because, and I'll probably set myself off. I might set you off too.
Round 2, let's go.
Start crying in a second as well. But so when I fell pregnant with Humphrey, when Willow was 10 months old, my dad started getting sick. And that was like, I've mentioned it in a couple of episodes now, but we've recorded the episode of Willow and Humphrey's pregnancies and births. And then when I was editing it, I was having such a trauma response, which I actually started having when you were talking then.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's all right. It's something that I have to work through. Like, come on, it's nearly 7 years later. But yeah, my dad started getting sick. He was sick my whole pregnancy. And then I was 41 weeks on the dot when we were called into the hospital to say our goodbyes. And yeah, and it's fucking huge. We were there all day, and I ended up having a really bad migraine, and I was like, I have to go home because I have a migraine. And we were like, most of my family was shell shocked because it was just not how we saw that happening. And I'm giving a very abbreviated version of the story, but yeah, I went home and my waters broke, and I had Humphrey at home in 3 hours. And then it was actually, my dad was at the hospital I was meant to give birth at. So I was booked to give birth at, even though I knew I was never actually going to go in there, but I still had an obstetrician through my pregnancy. And so we called the ambulance after, and they came and took me back to the hospital, and my dad and Humphrey met, And then, so Humphrey was born that morning. My dad passed away that night. And he's like, you know, he was like, yeah, my everything. And me and Toga were working really hard while he was sick to make sure that that outcome didn't happen. And then when it did, it was like fucking killer. So, yeah.
Oh, that's like so special that they got to.
Yeah, but I had the same feeling, like I can't have any more kids. And even though after I had Willow, I was like, oh, I'm doing this 5 times. Like, you know, that experience with Willow, like my mum and dad were around all the time. And I mean, my dad was, you know, me and Toga were at my mum and dad's house when I went into labour with Willow, and they were like the first people to meet her and all of that. And then, yeah, after Humphrey, I was just like a fucking shell of a human.
You just went that's so much.
It was huge. It was a lot. But then, yeah, I remember just feeling like, well, this is it now. Like, and also, I mean, for multiple reasons, that postpartum experience was very tough. And we were just like, no, like we're done now. Two is good. Like Humphrey screamed for months and months and months, which I think he had every right to, because the situation he evolved in was stress and anxiety and just so much heartache.
Yes.
And also, like, you know, we'd get over a hill and we'd be like overjoyed, but it was like this up and down bipolar situation. Yeah. And then when I fell pregnant with Rue, which was a surprise pregnancy, it was actually like, it was insane because he was due around the same time as Humphrey's birthday. And we went through that pregnancy feeling all the same. Like, I don't know, the year after Humphrey was born, like you go through those, like just the smells of the seasons changing, and it would trigger me and it would bring up some fucked up experience that I'd just be like, why? And then, and then I fell pregnant with Rue, and I got to experience that all again without the stress and trauma and anxiety. But there was that like, fuck, he's never going to meet my dad. And that was, it was such a big thing.
How was your postpartum, having gone through like or pregnancy, like, because obviously your dad, that happened and you were pregnant. So you were obviously going through the motions and, you know, grieving and stuff. Like, do you feel like there was a difference in your pregnancy, just like how you felt and carried, and then like postpartum?
Yes. It's interesting that you asked that, because I've probably had like 4 cycles since before pregnancy, like when I conceived. And I feel like there's a part of me that's just sort of waking up postpartum now, and sort of with my cycle return, it almost gave me this opportunity each month to sort of release a lot of grief and mourning and these things that I've probably unconsciously held on to, just because, you know, I'm parenting 3 kids and stuff like that. And I've really noticed that my cycle has sort of brought a lot of that forward again. And just, I suppose there's plenty of differences in, I have the 4 siblings, and my dad was like the center of our family. So, you know, our family, everything revolved around him, sort of, in a way, not in a nice way. He very much brought the family together. And I suppose my postpartum was different in that way, that just like the core person of my family isn't there. But at the same time, just having Tashi, our 3rd child, and bringing her into the family, it's so healing, and it's you've got so much gratitude for life, I suppose, when you have faced sort of someone you care about dying. I think on the other side is, you know, a bigger appreciation for what you do have. And I think that was something that I experienced and still do now, just so much gratitude for, you know, the people in my life and slowing down and just knowing what is important. I think Dad's death, I don't know about you as well, just sort of shows you that. Like everything else is just bullshit in a way. You're like, oh my gosh, what? Like I just don't care about any of that sort of stuff. I just need to be with my family and follow what I'm being called to creating in life. And yeah, but I suppose, there was lots of differences, but there probably is each baby as well. I don't know if Dad's death like impacted my healing or anything like that. Yeah.
Such a big time.
It's fucking huge. And like you do hear quite a few stories of like the birth, death, you know, coming like, yeah, that comes together.
Oh, and since I had that experience with my dad and I've heard so many stories now that it just doesn't seem that uncommon for women grieving and mourning and giving birth, and like we get to hold it all, and like women are amazing, truly.
Yeah, and I don't know. At the time, you're just like, I don't even know. For me, my experience was like, I don't even know how this is even like, how is this even possible? Like, I mean, in my experience, I was getting messages that were like condolences, congratulations, like in the same message, and I'm just like, turn my phone off because I don't even know what to do with that. Like I can't. And like, I mean, I'd get really angry at people. Like why? Because I can't conceptualize any of that. Like I mean, I still haven't probably integrated that, you know, part of my life properly because I just kept having babies and pushing it to the side. But yeah, it's crazy. And then like we had another experience actually when I finally got Togger on board to have a fourth. I had to work. It was work, people. We finally like were in trying mode, and I was just like, let's do this. And it was Valentine's Day.
Cute.
That night, right? And I was like, yeah, we're definitely pregnant. And we woke up that morning and Togger had got a call that his best friend had passed away. And we were just like, what the fuck? Like, how does this keep happening? And like, it was just, I mean, obviously we were like, what the fuck? Because he was like after my dad was like that masculine staple in my life, you know, it's like, I mean, Togger, it's obviously the masculine staple in my life, but no one loves you like your dad loves you. Like it's just not, there's no substitute for that. But then a lot of that, like you just like the love that you hold for that person in the time that I was in, I transferred it over to Marcus because he was there, he was supporting Togger through the business and stuff when my dad passed, and he was Togger's kind of like base. But then when me and Togger started to fall apart, he was my base too, and I would talk to him heaps and like confide in him, and he ended up being that masculine energy for me too. And then time just kind of went on and I didn't need it as much, and you know, Togger became that core for me. But then when he passed away, I was like, how? And like when, you know, we're trying for a baby and we did fall pregnant, I think it was the next month we found out we didn't find out because I never took a test, but I was like, my belly's growing and I'm feeling real nauseous and I guess I'm pregnant, but I don't know, and I guess we'll find out in 10 months time. But yeah, it's such a big, like for us, I mean, it's been a massive theme that the two are so in sync with each other. There isn't, like there can't be any different in birth or death.
It makes sense. Like you're like, of course they're together because there can't be life without death. There can't be
and like
death.
the transition from like the transition into life it has to be the same as the transition out of life.
I wish we could somehow like wrap it up into words for people to really let go of the fear of death in birth, because it's obviously what keeps women going to the hospital. It's obviously what hooks you into the medical system when you're pregnant, because you are so, like, we are all so afraid of a bad outcome or a death, and like it does happen, but there's obviously a million reasons why it could happen. But yeah, I just wish we had the words to be like, just to dissolve that.
I think like one of the biggest takeaways for me was death is going to happen. Like, it's going to happen. And like, I mean, one was a real surprise and the other was always a possibility, but we were working our asses off to do everything to make sure it didn't, and it still happened. So I think, you know, birth, like in my mind, birth is going to happen, and whatever the outcome, like you can work your ass off and do whatever you want to try and make it the outcome you want. But in the end, it's going to be the outcome it's meant to be, which is, it's a hard
pill to swallow.
It's a hard pill to swallow. It's hard to grasp, but in it, there is a little bit of relaxation that you don't have ultimate control over it. I mean, you have control over your choices.
Well, that's why I think people step into the system, is because they think that they're going to be saved.
Well, they think that the system has any fucking control. Oh, I'm going to have to put an explicit warning on this one. Hey, girls.
As you're talking, I'm like, no wonder you started a podcast. Like, you have so many stories to tell.
Too many
my
stories.
gosh.
And I'm like, I'll invite guests and just tell my shit. Like,
Well, this has actually been a good opportunity for you to let go of some of that, because, you know, like that story of yours, I mean, Keshia always says it, but when we were recording, my face was just like
the whole
jaw to the floor. I could not, like, I knew a little bit of the story, but with the detail, I could not even comprehend the details. And so I'm glad that you've given a little bit today.
I know. And like, and the thing is that you feel, you know, I mean, when I was going through it, I just felt so alone. And like, and then I met lots of mums, and like I met that, I mean, it was in that postpartum, you know, 4-month mark, I met you, and I met so many other mums, and I couldn't, there's no way I could have shared that. Like, I couldn't have said anything about it, because it would just like get stuck. And then you feel that pit in your stomach and like, oh, we have to go home for a nap now, and I'm going to crawl into a corner and cry. Like, but the thing is, like, and that was actually why I was like, what the fuck? Because I went through that before you had your experience, and had I have shared that story, if I was ever capable of, like, I mean, if someone had shared their story with me, I would have, you know, it if anything, just makes you feel a little less alone in it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, again, I just like bailed on all the social media and was...
You went rogue on everyone.
I went rogue.
How are you after like, so it's been like 2.5 years.
Yeah, since that passed. I'm mostly good. But then I'm really not good at times. But it's cliche to think that time does help. Like, everyone says that. And I suppose it's just, this is the first time for me experiencing like the loss of someone so close, so important. You know, the person, Dad was, to me, was, if anything was wrong in my life, not wrong, anything was exciting in my, like, he was the first person I called. If I just wanted to chat about anything, that's who I called. So now when things happen, my person that I lean on, I'm like, where you at?
So, can you imagine? Like, it freaked me out how many times I'd go to call his number without even thinking, and then just being like, oh, like, and it almost just like hits you again.
Yeah.
It took a really long time for that to stop. But I don't know. I'm like, oh God, I actually remember when my friend Marcus passed away, and I was just like, like, I couldn't believe it. And I did really grieve and mourn him. And a friend of mine was like, "Oh, time will heal." And she didn't know me when I had Humphrey and gone through that with my dad. And I was just like, I just wanted to rip her to shreds in that moment. I'm like, but no, like, you have no fucking idea. Like, it doesn't heal. You just get better at grief. Like,
my mum and I were talking about this 2 days ago. I said to her, I was like, can you believe it'll be 3 years without Dad at the end of this year? Like, he died 2 days before Christmas. So it's incomprehensible to my brain. So when I'm like, oh, time heals or it helps, it's not exactly what you said. It's not like, oh, you know, it's all good now. Like,
it's just back to being the person you were. Like, never.
Yeah, you just sort of get used to it in a way that he's no longer here, but it doesn't change anything. I feel like time it's not even real when it comes to grief and stuff like that. I had a younger sister that passed, and I was really young when this happened, and it was her 31st birthday the other week. And I remember saying to my mum, and just because growing up and, you know, even in adulthood, just thinking, oh, it was so long ago, you know, my mum,
I wonder how, be okay now.
Yeah. And thinking, oh, heck, now I'm like, oh, she's probably not. Like, she's been 30-something years, but she's probably never going to be okay. Yeah. So it's, I suppose, just this, initiation into understanding loss and what that actually is. Because unless you go through it, you don't understand it. And what you said, like when someone said something and it made you angry, I experienced the same thing, but until I realized, like, no one can say anything. They can't. If they don't say something, it's not great. If they say something, not great. And you're like, oh, this is just not great.
Like, I'm just going to be either angry or sad. You're never going to win. Like, you can say something, I'm going to hate you. You cannot say something,
Noted.
could still hate you. Like,
noted.
Chloe's progressively like, oh gosh.
No, but I think what I've found, and your experience, I mean, you're still a bit more raw, but what I found is that we just inject humor into the grief, and it helps. Just say something real funny or super inappropriate, and that helps with the whole thing.
I so agree. And my dad actually had a really dry sense of humor and said inappropriate things constantly. So now it's actually so nice because my sisters and I, we always just say random things that my dad would say and we have a laugh about it. So yeah, I really agree. Just keep laughing so you don't cry now.
Yeah, no, but I think you get the same release out of it too if you've done any of the aware parenting stuff, which now everyone knows what triggered my aware parenting journey. But crying and laughing are both stress relief. So, I mean, we do a lot of laughing over here.
I feel like I was just thinking, because you live a pretty special lifestyle when you're kind of moving around, slow, simple kind of lifestyle. And I feel like that would be to somewhat an advantage because, you know, most people when they grieve or they've had someone really close to them pass, they're just like go back to life, busy. And obviously that always pushes back the grief and the emotions and you can really shut it out pretty easily. But, you know, someone like you guys who live this lifestyle where you're, you know, like either spending a lot of time outside, you're in nature, you're traveling, you're moving around. I kind of feel like maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, like you're faced with the elements that remind you of life and death, like nature. And I guess it could potentially be, it just kind of like peels away at the acceptance of the nature of life a little bit more. And so I guess in a way, I don't know where I'm going with this, but I kind of feel like it's a bit of a, like you've got a bit of a head start in just feeling more like I can do this, like I can observe that this is life almost. I don't know if that's an insensitive thing to say, but yeah.
No, I understand what you're saying and I really agree in that. I think we've decided to live a particular way and it is what we love doing. And so I feel like if I was maintaining a life that didn't I didn't love and I was doing all of these things that I didn't actually want to do, then yeah, it would be even harder, because I think you are shown like how fragile life is and how it is such a gift. And so you don't, like for me, like I don't want to waste it. Like I don't want to just unconsciously like my days fly by, because I'm like, oh no, we got to make the most of it. And it just so happens that we like living like a really slow, simple sort of life.
Present.
Yeah.
It's very like in the now, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't always nail that, but like that's the goal.
Yes, it's always the goal. Doesn't mean it happens.
No.
Doesn't mean that we're perfect parents.
But it's great that we have these conversations to remind us.
Yeah, that life is not always beautiful Instagram aesthetics and happy, joyous moments. It's always ebbs and flow with the darker side.
And I think like a really good takeaway is that you can't have the epic joyous moments by themselves. Like if someone's sharing epic joyous moments on their Instagram, maybe what's not being shared is some pretty fucking hard times too. And it's good to keep that in mind, that you don't actually get one without the other. So, the wonderful dichotomies of life.
Yeah.
Well, this conversation took a turn I didn't think it was going to take.
I feel like I initiated that turn. I'm like, oh, I have a few regrets actually. Like,
I regret everything.
Oh my God. If we never release this episode, you know why. Joking. It'll be our most played, I bet you. Shit. See, I'm the friend that injects humour everywhere, right?
Yes, thank you. That's what we need. Two dead dads and a humorous
Whoa.
see, we can laugh.
I'm not. You psychopath. Anyway, look.
That'll be the real. Yeah. Two dead dads and a fun friend.
Well, look, you got to be good at marketing these days if you want to make an impact. Oh, goodness. Shit. Let's go eat some cake and cry in the corner.
Jinti, thank you so much for coming in and making me cry, bringing up some of my trauma.
So welcome.
But thank you for sharing. It's yeah, because I actually had no idea. So and again, I can't believe like how much our paths have crossed, and we've experienced
Similar.
Yeah, like crazy. That was
similar.
Yeah, that was actually quite a thing for me to hear. So hopefully this has helped anyone else going through a similar experience that hasn't shared.
Maybe I can share one more thing, because I remember this, it was the first time I was ever going to free birth, and I had someone really close to me have a lot of fear about my decisions and stuff like that. And I called my dad and I told him sort of what happened, and I just wanted to talk it out. And I remember him saying to me that birth is such a like sacred and spiritual experience, and so many people only see it as like a physical thing that they go through, and that's why they can lean on the medical system, or they can like want to be saved or whatever. And I just found that so true, because it is such a sacred and spiritual experience. And I think if we as women sort of acknowledge that more, it will change some of the decisions that we make to honor the whole process, and not just see it as like something happening to my body or something like that. And yeah, that sort of stuck with me. And so maybe since I ended up talking about dad, like that's something sort of important to share for anyone who is going into a birth or anything like that, that like we get to honor the parts of us and like the different things happening to us that are beyond like just this physical changes, because we are like being transformed in all of the ways through pregnancy, through birth and parenting as well.
I think like something that is so true to that as well is that it is like we as women who birth, and if you haven't experienced death, we understand death better. Like we understand death. So I think that's, it's a huge process. And God, I just wish for every woman that has a baby to be able to go into that and feel that we are the keepers of both birth and death. And
yes,
where it's some powerful stuff.
Well,
Jinti, where can people find you? They want to get into this a bit more.
well, currently we're at a hip camp down the road, like
what's the address?
in the camper. You can find me just online. I've got one of my son's birth video is on YouTube, so maybe we can link that if anyone wanted to see. That was like the first free birth that I had, and I believe it's still on YouTube, and then otherwise just on Instagram.
You said you're not blah, blah, blah. You're not doing YouTube anymore. Like it's not a
no. We stopped it. I stopped a couple years ago, actually. Not long after, just before I found out that my dad was really unwell. And then so much happened, and then it feels like impossible to go. Like
Do
it
you
just
guys want to, or is it kind of just like been there, done that?
This would be a whole other thing to go into, but it's sort of like
saddle up everyone, another hour's coming. No.
It's something that maybe I would like to. Really briefly, there was so many different things that led to like not doing it and stuff like that. But I would like to one day, probably differently than how I did it in the past. Just we'll see though. It just feels a lot. But then here I am, and you guys have set this whole podcast up. You've got 4 kids each, so I've got no excuses.
I want to see YouTube content next week.
I'm just going to drop the vlog with
All right. Thank you so much, Jinti. It's been an honour to have you on.
Thank you for sharing the more, personal stories to us.
Am I the first person that came on and cried on your podcast?
No.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so inspired by everything that you are both doing. And I think your podcast is amazing.
Thank you, darling.
Thanks, love. Thanks for tuning in to the Road to Wisdom podcast. To join the journey, you can follow us on Instagram at theroadtowisdom.podcast and at www.theroadtowisdompodcast.com. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. We look forward to seeing you next week with more juicy content.